citizens of the internet, smokers, friends, neighbors. Hope you're doing well out there. So much stuff going on, and me over here trying to do a better job getting videos out quick, trying to refine my process, so to speak. And there's been so much interesting stuff, and what's cool for me is I started kind of doing this project, this whole politics thing, several years ago when I was a volunteer for the Bernie Sanders campaign. I saved a bunch of footage, and we're gonna use some of that footage today that I saved because it's relevant again. And there's just a lot of big things happening, big shifts, I think, in the world in general. And you know, the press of course is going to be going crazy with this whole Trump thing. It's really wild to me how disconnected from reality so many people are with the Trump situation. I logged into my Instagram the other day, and you know, a bunch of people who I haven't seen in years cheering for Trump's indictment like it's anything. I mean, what's really wild to me about the Trump stuff is how people who have, you know, people I know anyway, have waited for him to be held to account, so to speak, for all these terrible things he's done. They get duped time and time again, and they still come back for more. This most recent thing, I mean, even if anything comes of it, it's the charge itself is so ridiculous. If they put him in jail on that, I mean, it's wild. So anyway, I'm rambling already. Let's get into it. I think that whole Trump conversation sets the pretext for what I wanted to talk about first today, which is just truth and censorship and freedom, because this whole censorship regime started a long time ago. And people like Matt Taibbi have just been so demonized by the left. It's sad. It's sad that these people sort of forgot who this guy was, you know? And anyway, I saw Russell Brand interviewing Matt Taibbi, and I wanted to talk about this clip right here. So listen to this real quick.
Absolute principles, don't you, Matt?
Yes, I think so. And I think what's really striking about all the people who are backing these censorship measures is that they have absolutely no understanding of what the principle of free speech is all about. The whole idea that you can have a centralized sort of truth-deciding authority is
Ministry of Truth
to every Enlightenment idea about what speech is for. Like you can't have a government body that decides fact and fiction. We don't believe that that's actually possible. What we believe is that people freely discuss things, and they arrive at a kind of truth together. Factual truth is always a moving target in journalism, but as a society, you can't just decide what's true and what's not true, because as we learn, even scientific fact changes constantly. So if you don't allow free speech, if you don't allow weirdos and people who are crackpots to have their say, you know, because they're right a lot of the time. Like you just never know.
Alex Jones,
right? And the folks who want to get rid of all of that are deluded and extremely dangerous people, because what they believe is that they have all the answers. Like we're the experts, we know, and you know, never mind what you think, which is terrible.
Their certainty is terrifying, and certainty is often an indicator of the psychopath, I would say.
I mean, the reality is, if people are insane and they're saying insane things, they're going to be proven as such. So, you know, if people that are out here saying, oh, the world is flat, you know, all these flat earth people, it's kind of like, okay, well, that's provably false. You know, like we have satellites in space that can show that you're wrong. So go ahead and say that. You just look like a dummy. you know? And, you know, I'm the biggest, I'm conspiracy theories are conspiracy reality. So I started thinking about it, and I'm like, what am I going to do? I got to start a group for leftists who are pro free speech, right? So, because it's just not a thing on the left now. You know, the left wants to censor Trumpers or people they disagree with, quote unquote fascists or Nazis. And again, if you're a Nazi and you're saying things that are violent, there's laws right there to take you out. Like if you're making actual threats to people, you're gonna go to jail for that. It's not legal whether it's on social media or a telephone or in person. But if you're a Nazi and you're out there saying racist things, you know, go ahead and expose yourself. Let these people expose themselves. Why can't they expose themselves? You know? So I'm going to start this group for left pro-free speech advocates on the left, and it's going to be called Fossil, since that's kind of like a dead idea to the left. Freedom of Speech Leftists. That's the best acronym I could come up with, FOSL, which is ironically a stock call out for some fossil fuel company too, but Fossil, Freedom of Speech Leftists. An ancient... a callback to an ancient time when people on the left respected speech. And just to kind of go down that road a little bit, let's remind you what the ACLU says. Okay? What does the ACLU say? Why does the ACLU defend free speech for Nazis, KKK members, and others who advocate racist or totalitarian doctrines? Why does the ACLU do that? Because we believe that the constitutional guarantees of freedom of speech and press would be meaningless if the government could pick and choose the persons to whom they apply. And remember, the government changes. A couple years ago, Trump and the Republicans ran the government, and they could tell you what was and what wasn't if they had this power. Right now, the Democrats run it. They're the power party. And so, you know, everyone in the Democratic Party and on the left is calling anyone who criticizes them a Russian propagandist and advocating for censorship. And when the conch changes hands, you're going to be the victim of the things you're advocating for now. So the ACLU's responsibility since its founding in 1920 has been to make sure that all free speech, that all are free to speak no matter their ideas. And like I said earlier, if your ideas are shitty, if you're stupid, if you're a Holocaust denier or a flat earther, there's evidence to prove you're an idiot. So go ahead and expose yourself, you know? And don't at me if you're a flat earther. That whole thing is stupid. I'm not on that train. What does Noam Chomsky say? He says, if we don't believe in freedom of expression for people we despise, then we don't believe in it at all. And, you know, it's a ridiculous time when I have to explain this to quote unquote liberals, people who at one time valued freedom of expression. You know, I saw this conversation, I think it was on Jimmy Dore, where they were talking about how, don't quote me on that, it might have been on Rogan. They were talking about how it used to be tough to make fun of the left because they weren't uptight and they didn't really care about it, where right-wingers were easy. And I remember when like they tried to do a Fox News version of The Daily Show, it lasted like a week because what made Jon Stewart and The Daily Show appealing was he was speaking truth to power. He was cutting through the echo chamber of the press and pointing out how stupid it was, and that was the appeal of it. And so when the Fox people back then, the neocons who were advocating for war, tried to do it, it just fell flat on its face because they're like, ha ha ha, you think that the Iraq war is a bad idea? Silly communist. But there's no proof that any of those people were communists, and the Iraq war was a bad idea, so they had the facts on their side, so it wasn't funny. And now those roles have flipped. Now it's the liberals who are the uptight authoritarians and the Babylon Bee with the good jokes being censored. You know, it's a weird. It's not a weird transition if you've really been paying attention to what's going on. But I digress. The reason I brought up this whole censorship thing was because what inspired me, obviously the clip with Russell and Matt talking about it, but this whole TikTok ban thing. So let's talk about this. Now, I just recently got on TikTok like a couple weeks ago. I was paranoid about it. But I went through the terms. It's no different than any other app. It's just based in China. So in the recent hysteria of what's going on, they're trying to ban TikTok. So let's listen to this. This clip really stood out to me. And it's Adam Curry, who used to be a VJ on MTV, but has been on Joe Rogan quite frequently. And he's a media commentator. To be completely honest, I don't know what he does now, but he does mention in the course of a couple of these clips that he's familiar with the digital advertising ecosystem, which is what, some of my background is in. So I have experience with, all this, like, I used to work in like fraud detection, for example. So in like 2007, I was like weeding out Russian bots from ad traffic type stuff, So I know that what Adam's talking about is legit. He obviously does know what he's talking about, but here's what he had to say about this TikTok ban. And this was, the TikTok ban has come to a head now. It's actually in Congress, but this is from a couple months ago when he was on Joe Rogan. So listen to this.
Very opinionated explanation for what is going on with TikTok.
Okay.
TikTok was eating Silicon Valley's lunch. They were taking all the ad money from Instagram, from Twitter, from Google. I'd say Google and Instagram and Facebook, just killing it, knocking it out of the fucking park. So look at who is saying, "Oh, it's China and they're tracking everything and the Communist Party." Dude, Facebook tracks you, Google tracks you, everyone fucking tracks you.
All do the same
all
thing.
Over the place. But all of a sudden TikTok is a problem? No. It's because they're eating their lunch, and instead of competing, because they've tried, no one can seem to create the TikTok algorithm and the thing that they have going there. It's what people want, the quick hits, the sing-alongs, etc. So they decided to lobby politicians and come up with this scam. So it's Hawley, it's Marco Rubio. Oh no, this is China. Fuck no. It's because Silicon Valley couldn't compete with them. That's what's going on.
Interesting.
Oh yeah,
That's an interesting perspective.
Just look at.
Note who he called out right there, Hawley, because we'll come back around to that.
There was so much. Everyone was buying TikTok. No, and when you have a big company like Facebook or Google who are tied into government. How many times have they been to DC to explain what they're doing? And so that's all controlled. That's the only. As
we saw with the Twitter files too, they have government.
Get these guys out of here and
direct access, direct lines to government.
American companies that run it. It's China. So now I'm not a China fan, but this is a fucking scam. They are just taking them down to get rid of the competition. It's very sad.
That's interesting because.
So in this next clip, he talks about, in this next clip, this is really interesting to me because this is something that I did not know about. And it's very interesting fact. What he's talking about is how TikTok is even cutting into Google search because now the youngins will go to a place like, and he uses Austin. He's like, people will go into TikTok and search in Austin, like what's best restaurant in Austin, and watch videos about what the best restaurants in Austin. And I had no idea until I saw him talking about this that was a thing. I didn't even consider the idea that TikTok was cutting into Google search revenue, but that's that's what the house is built on. That's the foundation that Google's built on. So listen to this.
It's all part of the distraction to keep us guessing, and whatever you do, keep posting selfies. We need you to keep posting selfies, keep letting us know what you're doing. That's back to TikTok. That's why Google is upset, because Kids today, I'm just going to use kids because we're old fucks now, Joe. Let's
I like
admit
it.
it.
Air quotes like Richard Nixon. Kids
Today. Kids today. Thank you.
Got a good Nixon impression.
When they want to find a good restaurant in Austin, they don't go on Google and say good restaurant in Austin. They go to TikTok. What's a good restaurant in Austin? And then there's a video of, this is great. Look at this food. Blah, 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 blah. That's
really?
where they're going. So the search is falling apart. And that's Google's business, is search. Everything is random for them. 120,000 people have been fired in Silicon Valley in the past 12 months.
Keep in mind, this was from a few months ago, too, so a lot more have been fired since this was taped. And I just thought that was interesting about Google, because I had no idea. I was not aware of the search thing, that TikTok was also cutting into Google search. So now you kind of get a better idea as to why there's such a loud chorus of voices against TikTok right now. And no offense to Google, I mean, YouTube is on Google, and I love YouTube, and I love Google, frankly. But it's interesting to hear these, please don't hit me, Google. It's interesting to hear these people, these ulterior motives, because it's not something that the average person really thinks about. So back to the Congress people who are behind this, I came across it was actually Michael Tracy who shared this clip of Rand Paul shooting this TikTok ban down, and look who's pushing for the TikTok ban. Watch this.
We should target this threat specifically. That's what this bill does that we have before us today.
That's Hawley, who
it goes right
Curry
at the
specifically
problem.
mentioned earlier.
It bans TikTok in this country. It protects the American people, and it sends the message to communist China that you cannot buy us. And so I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs be
Literally, like,
discharged
every
from
piece of
further
our economy is tied to
consideration
China,
of S85
but
and the
this
Senate
sends the
proceed to its
message.
immediate
You can't
consideration.
buy us.
I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and
Remember when
passed,
the
and that
NBA
the
had to
motion to
self-censor
reconsider
because of Chinese
be considered
markets?
made and laid upon the table.
My bad.
Is there an objection?
Madam President,
Senator from Kentucky.
reserving
A
the
hero
right to
emerges.
object. There are two main reasons why we might not want to do this. The one would be the First Amendment to the
Is there an
Constitution.
objection?
Speech is protected whether you like it or not. The second reason would be is that the Constitution actually prohibits bills of attainder. You're not allowed to have a specific bill against a person or a company. So this fails on two egregious points, pretty obvious points, and I think we ought to
According to
think
the
about
Constitution,
that.
Congress is
I think we should
supposed
beware
to
of those
vote
who
for
peddle
wars, but
fear.
we see
I think
that
we should
happening.
beware of those who use fear to coax Americans to relinquish our liberties, to regulate and limit our First Amendment rights. Every accusation of data gathering that's been attributed to TikTok could also be attributed to domestic big tech companies. In fact, one of the bills they're looking at doing is broad enough that the president will be given the power to designate whatever country he sees fit to be an adversary and whatever company underneath that definition. It would basically be a limitless authority for the president to ban speech. If Republicans want to continuously lose elections for a generation, they should pass this bill to ban TikTok, a social media app used by 150 million people, primarily young Americans. This brilliant strategy comes while polls indicate that 71% of young women and men, 53% of young men voted for a Democrat candidate for Congress. Admittedly, many Democrats have joined Republicans in calling for this ban, but like most issues, the blame will stick to the Republicans more. The Republican strategy to ban TikTok comes simultaneously with GOP complaints of domestic social media companies canceling and censoring conservatives.
Yes.
Without a hint of irony, many of these same conservatives now rail against censorship while advocating for censorship against social media apps they worry are influenced by the Chinese.
Thank you, Rand Paul! Yes! Good Lord! This is the kind of shit that Jon Stewart used to be like, how come the media isn't saying this? That's a great point, Rand Paul. The same motherfuckers who are out here losing their minds about the Twitter files are trying to censor TikTok. And thank you, Rand Paul. Really really gets me, gives me warm fuzzies to see someone pointing out the blatant hypocrisy of their own party on the House floor. This is why his father was so popular. This is why Ron Paul would go into a Republican debate and say, I voted against the Iraq War and it was a bad idea. And he would get massive applause from the audience. And as someone at the time I was an Obama kid, you know, I came up loving Obama. And when Ron Paul ran in 2012 and I saw the way that he kind of was outwardly against militarism in the Republican Party, I registered as a Republican that year just to vote in the primary. Now, I ended up voting for Obama in the general election over Mitt Romney. I mean, say what you want about Mitt Romney. That was a pretty easy choice, but and also Obama did Mitt Romney's healthcare plan at the national level. Mitt Romney famously implemented Obamacare, or, you know, basically the ACA at the state level in Massachusetts, which was Bob Dole's idea from the 90s, but we won't dig into that. The point of all this is the censorship thing is real, and you're really seeing people's true colors right now. And thank you, Rand Paul, again for calling out the hypocrisy of the people that are embroiled in the Twitter files, turning around and trying to ban TikTok. I appreciate that obvious distinction there, that very easy thing to call out to anyone who's paying attention, that our entire press seems to have missed, for, you know, other obvious reasons. But so the irony of all of this, too, is here's an article from the AP that says TikTok is not available in mainland China. And today we're headquartered in Los Angeles and Singapore, but I'm not saying that the founders of ByteDance are not Chinese, nor am I saying I don't make use of the Chinese employees like any other companies in the world. He added, we do use their expertise on some engineering projects. So this is a quote from the guy that Congress is grilling, the executive from TikTok. It's not available in mainland China. So Congress's argument is we need to be more like China in order to, you know, avoid the communist threat that's going to get us from China through TikTok. Now, I'd just like to close this little segment out by showing you this. CNET reported in, what's the date on this? 2020, February 12th of 2020, that Huawei, the chip maker that makes all the chips in your phone and the towers and everything, has backdoor access through those chips. So let's say that TikTok really is capturing data and giving it to the Chinese government. Well, guess what? They have way better access than TikTok because they make the chips that run everything in China. And that's not by accident. The only people we have to blame for this, for being so beholden to China and being caught up like this, is our own business people who outsourced all the labor to China because it's cheaper there. So they're the ones who exposed us to this threat and made, you know, if it is a threat, I mean, I don't even actually believe it's a threat, to be honest. I don't think China is after us. I don't, you know, it's these types of threats, as you obviously know if you're paying attention to anything. If you're watching my shit, you know that these threats are hyped for a reason, to sell weapons. So Russia's not a threat to us. It's a ridiculous premise, you know? And the people who, it's interesting to note that, you know, people like Trump who said, why can't we be friends with Russia, have been heavily smeared and, you know, had it as Russian assets. So you know the deal. Ban TikTok. It's ridiculous. By the way, when I logged into TikTok and this probably says a lot more about me than it says about anything else, but all I get, I call it tit talk, because all I get are videos of girls shaking their tits at this point. And it's because the algorithm, I'm sure, I came to the one girl's photo where she's, shaking her bra, and I just, of course, watched it for several moments. And then another one came up and I was like, oh, that's good too. And so it was frankly a very a downward spiral down the tunnel of tits on TikTok. Now it's like all I get in my feed are just girls shaking their breasts, or it even gives me breastfeeding videos sometimes of like babies feeding. That's how terrible it is. So, I spend most of my time on social media on Twitter anyway. Every once in a while, I'll log into TikTok and say, there are some people doing some cool political stuff on there, but it's, Russell Brand has some good stuff going on. But anyway, moving on from TikTok. As a build up to all this censorship, right? All these, so let me, yeah. So I think one of the reasons all of this censorship stuff hits so close to home with me is because I was someone who worked on the Bernie campaign, and it really started to ramp up hard during the 2020 election, the 2019-2020 election. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was so clear to me what was happening, right? And here's how I view the situation, right? So Trump was president and had been for 3 years, and the media had been going crazy, doing everything they could to try and depose him, impeaching, accusing him of being a Russian spy. But how did Trump get in to the White House in the first place? Well, he got in through social media, because people are largely disgusted with the mainstream media and ignore it. And while the mainstream media ran their narratives and their polls and all their garbage about deplorables and, Hillary's such a great woman and Trump's such a racist hater and all this stuff, Trump was talking directly to people through Twitter. And when election night happened and the numbers came in and the polls were all completely wrong and Trump won, I think a couple things happened. First of all, the people who worked for Hillary Clinton, who were promised positions in power, were very upset, and they went, "What are we going to do? Well, we're going to blame Russia, and we're going to spend the next 4 years, trying to paint Trump as a Russian and doing everything we can to get him out of there. And we're also going to tamp down on the way he got around our narrative, which was social media." So it started during the election, and I experienced this. I was banned for stuff. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but the press ran stories actively about mean people on social media. And what this kind of showed was, wow, reporters and media people hate things like Twitter because now they have to answer for their bullshit. People come after you if you say some dumb shit that has no basis, and these people have been so insulated for so long, out there sucking dick to power, stenographers to power, going to the same cocktail parties as politicians and licking their assholes instead of being reporters and reporting, objectively on what's happening, that this was such a shock to them. So watch this CNN clip from the Bernie era when this really started.
Recent weeks, trolling Senator Elizabeth Warren as a snake, and in post after post, labeling Mayor Pete Buttigieg a rat.
Two victims of this tell CNN they were so afraid of the online attacks they faced, they don't even want us to describe the circumstances for fear it would start up again.
I love
they both just
the one in the middle says
the politics of Bernie
plant.
Sanders in a public setting, and their personal lives were exposed and attacked.
So this is where this started, right? After Trump won, And now with the reveal, like the Twitter files coming out and everything, you can kind of see this concerted effort to tamp down social media, because the narrative control people, the kingmakers in the mainstream press, who could always smear someone and gain public, sway the public opinion in a presidential election, had lost their power with Trump, because they spent, the entire campaign cycle attacking him, and he still won. So social media was a threat. And so this was the beginning of, oh, look how mean these people are. When the reality is that you see that one comment, they lobbyist plant, they call that guy a lobbyist. But yeah, he probably was a lobbyist plant. And so these quote unquote reporters, aka media people who are, like I said before, stenographers to power, don't want this level of criticism. So they're going to work to help get social media locked down. So I kind of documented during this time how this escalated, right? Here's from the Atlantic's Facebook at that time, and I don't remember the exact date, but it was around 2019. Social media are ruining political discourse. And it has these two people in Bernie Sanders hats, and then at the bottom I wrote, for the record, it's social media is ruining political discourse. But yeah, it's ruining political discourse because you don't have complete control over it anymore. So I also kind of these are the types of things I was posting. I did I took this headline that says Obama privately said he would speak up to stop Sanders report from the Hill, and then I glued a picture of Obama with Weinstein in there saying oh, Bernie's so terrible, as he's posing with sexual assault predator Harvey Weinstein. So then I kind of pointed out too, the New York Times is obviously one of the most respected publications in the country, and they're the worst. They're one of the most dishonest papers there are. So I took these screenshots to kind of show how they're trying to shape this narrative. And so at this time in 2019, Bernie Sanders had raised $34.5 million just from small donations, more than any Democrat. And these are the headlines in the New York Times that day. Pete Buttigieg's campaign says it raised $24.7 million in the fourth quarter. Good for them. And Biden rebounds, Warren slows, Sanders rolls, the latest on the 2020 money race. So those are the headlines. If you're an average person, and this is probably one of the reasons they were so shocked as the voting results started coming in, is because, the New York Times had insulated all these donor people who didn't see Bernie or Trump, for that matter, coming, because they live in a world where they get their political opinions reflected back to them by the stenographers that they hang out with at dinner parties. So here's another example of the New York Times kind of subtly skewering Bernie while uplifting Hillary. There were sexual assault accusations during the campaign, and this one for Bernie, basically the story with Bernie's sexual assault claim on his campaign was this woman who had come forward and said that a guy touched her hair, and then he asked if he could touch her pretty curly hair, and then he ran his fingers through it and it made her uncomfortable, and he was saying things to her during the day that were kind of suggestive, I guess. That's that story. Hillary Clinton chose to shield a top advisor accused of harassment in 2008 is the other headline from Hillary's accusation, where she actually had a high-paid guy on her campaign who was literally assaulting women, not just running his fingers through their hair, doing very sexually lewd things to them. And she didn't even fire him. She just moved him to a different, a Catholic priest, moved him to a different leg of the campaign. And so you can see right here how, the way that they shape the editors, it's always the editors that are kind of shaping these headlines to favor their candidate of choice. And social media and Trump, put an end to that to some degree. So let's just talk about the New York Times. I mean, if you trust the New York Times, not that they don't do good reporting, there are good reporters at the New York Times and they do good stories, but you just have to approach everything with caution. And I could think of 3 examples just off the top of my head where the New York Times was wrong intentionally. And so let's go through those real quick. The Iraq War, the WMDs. Here's an apology that they issued from the New York Times. From the editors, The Times in Iraq. Over the last year, this newspaper has shown a bright light in hindsight on decisions that led the United States into Iraq. We've examined the failings of American and Allied intelligence, especially on the issue of Iraq's weapons and possible Iraqi connections to international terrorists. We've studied the allegations of official gullibility and hype. It is past time we turn the same light on ourselves. In doing so, reviewing hundreds of articles written during this prelude to war in the early stages of the occupation, we found an enormous amount of journalism that we are proud of, and we also helped lie you into a war. I'm not going to read the whole thing. So the next thing I thought of right offhand is, I don't know if you heard about Caliphate. Caliphate was a podcast piece that the New York Times did based on the accounts of this guy who was supposedly a former ISIS member. Turns out the guy got busted and was for lying in court, and the whole thing fell apart. And they had won awards for it. I think they had to return their awards. New York Times retracts core of hit podcast series Caliphate on ISIS. And I love so this guy who ran this story and then had to retract it and apologize is the same guy, the editor of the New York Times, his name's Dean Backett, who did the Trump Russiagate shit. And he hasn't turned the scrutiny internally yet on that. In fact, Jeff Gerth and Chris Hedges talked about how the New York Times did a Showtime show called The Fourth Estate, where they had documentary cameras in their offices filming them hammering together fake Trump Russia stories. So this Caliphate story completely fell apart, and listen to this quote from Dean Backett. I love this. We fell in love with the fact that we had gotten a member of ISIS who would describe his life in Caliphate and would describe the crimes, New York Times executive editor Dean Backett told NPR in an interview Thursday. I think we were so in love with it that when we saw evidence that maybe he was a fabulist, when we saw evidence that he was making some of it up, we didn't listen hard enough. Which is exactly what they did with the Trump-Russia story. And then third and final, last but not least, there was the time that Cenk Uygur from Young Turks was running for Congress, and New York Times smeared him as a racist. And what they did was he had done an interview with David Duke, and at the end of the interview, David Duke goes, I'm not a racist, and I'm paraphrasing here, and Cenk goes, sure you're not, in this real sarcastic tone, obviously of course you're not a racist, dude, you're the KKK Grand Wizard, he's a former KKK member, he's obviously a racist. New York Times printed this exchange without, of course, lending the context of the sarcastic tone. So on paper that looks terrible. Just when you don't have that sarcastic tone, it just says in black and white on paper of when David Duke said, I'm not a racist, Mr. Uygur responded, of course you're not. So when you don't have that tone, of course it looks like it's easy. And of course, some sleuths on the internet, some journalist criticizers, the kind of people who call people lobbyist plants or whatever, found this and ran it up the flagpole, and the New York Times had to apologize and issue a correction, which they did on Twitter. And again, this is the battle that we're fighting right now. Is this all started because of Trump kind of upsetting the press narrative and taking away that kingmaker status from the mainstream media, the quote unquote fourth estate. Yeah, they have not earned that title at all. in the last 20 years. They have cheerleaded every single war all the way. And up to right now, what you have going on with Ukraine, where Cy Hirsch did investigative journalism and good reporting on the Nord Stream pipeline, and the New York Times again came out and lied on behalf of the government. So you're getting what you signed up for with the New York Times. It's a garbage paper, and it's always been garbage. It's a tool of institutional power to mold and shape your opinions on issues. And when you recognize that, you can read the New York Times with scrutiny and go, okay, I know that these guys are trying to shape the agenda for powerful people, but here's some of the facts that they laid out that are relevant, you know. And that's all really you have to do with media today, because, you know, even shitlibs like Sam Cedar called out this smear. What I love about guys like Sam Cedar too is he'll point this out when it's relevant to Cenk Uygur, but he'll sit and he'll recite the New York Times with zero scrutiny when it comes to an issue like Ukraine or COVID. You know, he has no critical thought or any kind of journalistic, you know, curiosity when it comes to Ukraine and COVID. He'll just like recite that bullshit. But but here he is basically admitting they're frauds. So this is why guys like Sam Cedar get zero respect from me. He's a spineless jellyfish of a man who, you know, is meaningless in the grand, who dick rides Jimmy Dore constantly. And Jimmy Dore's smart enough to just completely ignore the guy because, you know, he's an unserious person, as you can see. And so I think that's kind of the apex of all this, you know. We kind of started with this Matt Taibbi statement about what is truth. And if you can't have a government or an agency telling you what definitive truth is. It's just that it doesn't work that way. The entire premise of the country that we live in is based on the freedom to speak. Read what does the First Amendment of the Constitution say? It's one of the few amendments I know kind of from heart. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or prohibiting the Congress shall make no law. Don't I'm revealing myself here. Yeah, I don't know. It basically you can't abridging the freedom of speech or religion with a free exercise of it, right? Can't be fooled again. Remember when Bush was like, he did that, you know what they say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you can't get fooled again. It's almost like he just didn't want to say shame on me. I love that. He couldn't admit he was wrong. Anyway, that's kind of what we have right now with the liberal establishment and the Democratic Party. Instead of taking people like Matt Taibbi and looking at the evidence that they're bringing to the table objectively, they're playing their role as partisan cult members, and it's a terrible look, to be honest, you know. And this is the trajectory that got us here too. This whole, okay, social media kind of helped break the chains of the kingmakers in the mainstream press, and now they're scrambling to pull that curtain back down. And I think it's evident in things like this TikTok ban how pathetic that kind of a move is, and what paper tigers these groups really are, you know. Anyway, thanks for listening.